The knife was already at her throat when Xavian Voss stepped out of the shadows. He moved without sound, without warning, the way only something ancient and utterly without mercy could move. And the two men holding Lenora Belmont against the alley wall had less than a second to register his presence before one of them was airborne. The second man barely managed to shout before Xavian's hand closed around his collar and lifted him clean off the pavement as though he weighed nothing at all, because to Xavian he did not. "Drop the knife," Xavian said. His voice was low, controlled. The kind of low that was not quiet at all, but rather the absolute silence before a catastrophe. The knife hit the ground with a clatter that rang through the alley like a gunshot. Lenora did not scream. She had pressed herself against the brick and was watching him with wide dark eyes, her breath coming in sharp controlled pulls, her hands still raised defensively where the attackers had pinned them. She was cataloguing the situation. He could see that clearly, not panicking. Thinking, he noticed that. He dropped the man he was holding, and the man scrambled after his companion into the deeper dark of the alley and was gone in seconds. Xavian stood in the space they had left, his white coat settling around him, his silver-white hair catching the thin blade of streetlight that cut through the gap between buildings. He turned to look at her, and something he had not felt in over 400 years moved through the locked vault of his chest. She was not what he had expected. He had been sent to retrieve a runaway, a young woman who had fled the protected housing unit maintained by the Voss Court on the eastern edge of the city, a woman placed under the protection of his lord, Valdris Voss, at the formal request of a dying ally. She was supposed to be a liability, a complication, a task he would complete within the hour and return to his post without a second thought. He had never once failed a task. He had never once wavered in his duty in 437 years of service to the Voss bloodline. Looking at Lenora Belmont standing in that alley, blood at her temple from where one of them had shoved her into the wall, chin lifted and jaw set, and those dark eyes cutting through him like she had already made a full assessment and was not particularly impressed with what she found. Something in the ancient architecture of his composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You followed me," she said. "It was not a question." "I was sent to retrieve you," he said. "There is a difference." "Is there?" She pushed off the wall and bent to pick up the knife they had dropped, turning it over once in her fingers before sliding it into the pocket of her jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had been keeping found weapons for a long time. "You can tell whoever sent you that I am not going back, Lenora Belmont," he said. She stilled. "You are under formal protection of blood law," he said, "signed by Lord Valdris Voss in the year of your birth. You are aware of this." "I am aware," she said carefully. "That blood law protection and blood law ownership look identical from the inside." He had no immediate response to that. She walked past him toward the mouth of the alley without another word, and he stood for a moment in the strange suspended quiet of someone who had just had the ground shift beneath 4 centuries of certainty, before he followed her out into the city. The city was London. Or rather, it was the city that London had become in this age. All glass towers and underground rivers and neon reflected in ancient stone, the old bones of the world wrapped in something it did not entirely fit. The Voss Court operated beneath Mayfair, 3 levels down, accessible through a Georgian townhouse whose address appeared on no city registry. Lenora had been placed in the protected apartments on the uppermost sublevel. She had left through a maintenance corridor at 2:30 in the morning, taking nothing but a bag she had apparently packed weeks in advance, which suggested this had not been an impulse. He fell into step beside her on the pavement. She glanced at him sideways. "You are not going to grab me," she said. "You had the opportunity, and you chose not to. So either you are not the seizing type, or you have been instructed to approach this diplomatically. Either way, you are going to try to talk me back." "I am going to walk you somewhere safe," he said. "Whether that is back to the court is a conversation we can have once you are not standing in the open with blood on your face." She touched her temple absently, looked at her fingertips, and made a small sound that was not distress exactly but resignation. The sound of someone who had expected the night to go badly and was not surprised to find they were correct. "There is a coffee shop 3 streets over," he said. "It is open. I am aware of it. She looked at him fully for the first time under proper light, and he understood the assessment she was making because he made the same one simultaneously. She was 24 years old, dark hair cut practically short on one side and longer on the other, a face that was striking rather than simply pretty, sharp, and purposeful. She wore a jacket 2 sizes too large and boots that had walked a significant number of miles, and she held herself with the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that making yourself small did not protect you from anything, so you may as well take up your actual space. "Fine," she said. The coffee shop was a narrow place called Astor that kept absurd hours because its owner was an insomniac artist who had never bothered to close properly. Xavian ordered nothing. Lenora ordered black coffee and a sandwich and ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had not been certain about their next meal. He waited. "Wait. How long have you been following me?" she asked when she had finished. 6 days, he said. Her expression shifted. Something complicated moved through it. "Then you know I have been careful." "Exceptionally careful," he agreed. "You avoided every standard surveillance route. You used cash. You changed your route pattern daily. You secured 2 separate contingency shelters before you moved." He paused. "You are very well prepared for someone who has spent most of her life under protection. Because spending most of my life under protection taught me that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I assume Valdres sent you specifically." "Yes, because you are the best." He did not confirm or deny this. The answer was evident enough. "Then he is serious about bringing me back." She looked out the window at the empty street. "I need you to understand something, Xavian Voss. I did not run because I was ungrateful or foolish or ignorant of what the blood law protection means in practical terms. I ran because I discovered something 3 weeks ago that made remaining under that protection actively dangerous, and I could not discuss it with anyone inside the court without risking that the information would get back to the wrong person before I knew who the wrong person was." The quiet in him shifted from controlled patience to something more acute. "What did you discover?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that weighed trust like a physical object, turning it in the hands, checking for fractures. "Someone inside the Voss Court has been in communication with Xavian Voss," she said. The name landed in the space between them like a stone dropped into deep water. The ripples were not visible, but they were there, Xavian Voss. The name had not been spoken openly in court in over a century. He had been a lord of the old blood courts, brilliant and vicious in equal measure, exiled after the Third Compact for violations that had been sealed into classified court record. He had supposedly died in 1987 in an incident involving a political coup in the Eastern European covenants that had ended badly for everyone involved, supposedly.
"Where did you find this information?"
Xavian said, and his voice was very controlled now. Controlled the way a blade is controlled, very still and very precise. "In Valdres's private correspondence files," she said. "I was not snooping. I was asked to cross-reference a guest registry for an upcoming court event, and I was given access to his personal archive to complete it. The correspondence was in a subfolder labeled administrative, which is why it had not been cleaned. Someone made an organizational error, and it was not caught because no one expected a human assistant to be doing filing work in that archive. You were given archival access," he said slowly. "I was trusted," she said, and there was something almost sad in the word. "Because I have been there since I was a child, and everyone assumes that a human who grew up inside the court is either loyal beyond question or too ignorant to understand what she is looking at." She met his eyes. "I understand exactly what I was looking at." Xavian sat with this information and the very old and very disciplined part of him that had survived 4 centuries by never reacting, before he had processed, fully kept him motionless and expressionless, while something cold and very serious moved through his reasoning. Xavian Voss alive, and in communication with someone inside Voss Court. Lenora Belmont in possession of that information. Lenora Belmont, who had, in the weeks since discovering it, not fled to any external authority or rival court, had not attempted to sell or barter the information, had not tried to contact anyone who could be identified as an enemy actor. She had simply run, had made herself small and invisible, and had kept the information locked inside her own head, and had not trusted a single person with it. You ran to protect yourself, he said. I ran because I did not know who had made the contact, she said. Valdris is the named account, but the correspondence style is not his. Someone used his credentials. I do not know if he is aware. I do not know if he is complicit. I do not know if telling him would solve the problem or sign my death notice. So I ran, and I planned to stay running until I had enough distance to think clearly about what to do next. That is, he said, remarkably sound reasoning. She looked at him as though she had expected him to disagree. The fact that he had not seemed to recalibrate something in her. I need to see the correspondence, he said. I copied it, she said. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a folded envelope, then thought better of it and tucked it back. I'm not handing it to you in a coffee shop at 3 in the morning until I know what you intend to do with it. Fair, he said. If Valdris is complicit, she said, then you have a problem too, because your loyalty is to him and your sworn duty is to the court. And if the lord of that court is in league with a man who was exiled for what the records call unspecified violations of the blood compact, then your ancient vow and your honor are pointing in opposite directions. He looked at her. You have thought about this from my perspective. I have had 6 days walking around London to think about every possible angle, she said. I considered whether you specifically would be a threat. I concluded that if Valdris wanted me dead or disappeared, he would not send his most visible and principled guard, because you are too well known to the broader court community to be used in something covert without risk. You were sent because you are supposed to bring me back cleanly, and because your reputation means that my cooperation is implied, which means Valdris either does not know what I found, or he knows and believes I do not understand its significance. Either scenario suggests, Xavian said, that you are currently safer with me than without me. She was quiet for a moment. That is the conclusion I was coming to as well. She looked at him directly. But I need something from you first. Name it, your word, she said. Not the word of the Voss Court, not the word of a guard in duty to his lord, your word. Xavian Voss, as a person who has lived 4 centuries and presumably developed a perspective of his own about right and wrong. Your word that if what I found means Valdris is complicit, you will act on the truth rather than the vow. The silence that followed was one of the longest he had experienced in recent memory. He had been asked before to choose between duty and conscience. Twice in 4 centuries, and both times the choice had resolved itself cleanly, yet as the circumstances had been clear. This was not clear. This was a young woman with sharp, dark eyes asking him to promise, before he had seen the evidence, before he knew the full shape of the threat, that his honor would outrank his loyalty. And the most extraordinary thing, the thing that unsettled him in ways he did not have clean language for, was that he did not find it a difficult question. You have my word, he said. She studied him for another moment, then reached into her jacket and placed the envelope on the table between them. He read it carefully. Then he read it again. The correspondence was dated across a period of 11 months. It had been routed through Valdris's secure account, but the encryption signature on 2 of the messages was subtly wrong, a variance that a human archivist would not catch, and that a vampire archivist would not think to look for, because no one inside the court would imagine their lord's credentials had been compromised. Someone with deep technical knowledge and court-level access had used Valdris as a mask. This was not Valdris, he said. I know, she said. I realized that about 4 days after I ran. The signature pattern is wrong, and 2 of the messages reference meetings that Valdris was documented elsewhere for. Whoever this is, they used him as cover. She paused. Which means someone inside the court is communicating with Xavian Voss and framing it to look like it comes from the Lord himself, which is either preparing the ground for a coup or is already the late stage of one. If Xavian Voss is alive and has an operative inside Voss Court, Xavian said slowly, then the court is already compromised, and if the blood law protection was used as the mechanism to bring you in, if you were placed under Valdris's protection specifically to be positioned inside the court, then someone wanted me there, she said. Yes, I have been trying to figure out why for 6 days, and I keep coming back to one answer. My mother. He looked up from the papers. My mother was human, she said. She died when I was 3, but before she died she was a researcher. She worked for an independent archive called the Belmont Collection, which specialized in pre-Campac supernatural lore. She spent 7 years documenting old-world blood codes and loophole provisions that the formal courts had deliberately buried. She met his eyes. I think she found something. I think whatever she found is why the blood law protection was arranged for me at birth and why Xavian Voss is interested in my existence. The weight of the situation settled over him with the solemnity of something very large and very old. This was not a runaway. This was not a liability. This was a woman at the center of something that had been in motion since before she could walk, and she had been smart enough and strong enough to figure out most of it on her own in 6 days, with nothing but her own mind and the cold streets of London. "We need to find the Belmont collection," he said. "I know where it is," she said. "My mother's files were placed in a secure archive in Edinburgh when she died. I have been meaning to access them for years, but I was never allowed to leave court long enough to do it, which, in retrospect, was probably not a coincidence." He folded the papers and tucked them inside his coat. "Then we go to Edinburgh." She blinked. "Tonight? It is safer to move while whoever is watching the court access points believes I am still in the city searching for you. By dawn their surveillance will tell them I am not reporting back, and the calculation changes." He looked at her steadily. "I have a vehicle. We can be there before sunrise." She stood, pulled her jacket straight, and looked at him with an expression he could not entirely categorize. Something between wariness and the very beginning of something that was not wariness at all. "You said you have been following me for 6 days," she said. "Yes. You watched me sleep in a hostel on Wednesday night." He said nothing, which was itself an answer. "You could have taken me then," she said. "You had every opportunity. Why didn't you?" He considered lying. He was exceptionally good at lying, having had 4 centuries to practice. But he looked at her and found that the lie would not form. "Because you looked," he said carefully, "like someone who was finally somewhere they had chosen to be. And I could not make myself take that from you until I understood why you had run." She held his gaze for a moment in which several things happened quietly between them that neither of them named. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the door. "Edinburgh, then." The car was a black Bentley that was old enough to have a quiet grandeur about it without being ostentatious. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat and spent the first 40 minutes of the motorway in silence, watching the lights of the city dissolve into the dark, flat expanse of countryside. And he did not try to fill the silence because he had learned long ago that some people needed silence the way others needed water. Around the 2nd hour, she said, "What do you actually believe in?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Clarify. You have served the Voss bloodline for 400 years. You have done things on their behalf that I imagine were not always things you would have chosen independently. And tonight you made me a promise that directly conflicts with that service. So I am asking what you actually believe in, separate from duty, justice," he said after a moment. "Specifically the idea that a code of law is only as good as the people willing to enforce it against those who hold power, not only against those who do not." He paused. "It is the reason I entered service to the Voss Court in the first place. Valdris's ancestor, Xavian Voss, was the primary architect of the Third Compact. She spent 40 years building a legal framework that protected humans and lesser power covens from the absolute authority of old blood lords who had previously operated without consequence." He glanced at Lenora. "I believed in what she was trying to build. I have spent 4 centuries protecting that belief, more than I have protected any individual in the bloodline." "Xavian Voss," Lenora said quietly. "My mother wrote about her. She was the one who built the blood law protection provisions. Yes. Then, if Xavian Voss is moving against the Voss Court and using the blood law protections as a mechanism," she said, "he is not just moving against a political rival. He is moving against the compact itself." "Yes," Xavian said again. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, that makes me angrier than I expected." Something in him that had been tightly wound for 6 days, tightly wound perhaps for much longer than 6 days, eased very slightly. The secure archive in Edinburgh was held beneath the new town in a converted Victorian banking hall that had been purchased by a preservation society in the 1960s and had, in the decades since, become something considerably more. The Belmont collection was not listed in any public catalogue. Lenora knew of it because her mother had left her a letter, sealed and delivered through a solicitor on her 18th birthday, which had included an address, a code, and the sentence, "When you are ready to know, you will know to come here." She had not been permitted to come here. She had the code memorized. She had memorized it at 18 and kept it in the back of her mind for 6 years, like a door she had not yet found the corridor to. Standing at the entrance now, Xavian at her shoulder, she found that her hands were steady. The archive was tended by a woman named Osseline, ancient and precise, who was vampire but not aligned with any active court. She looked at Lenora for a long moment and then at Xavian for an even longer one. "Xavian Voss," Osseline said. "I have not seen you in a considerable time." "Osseline," he said. "She has a right to the collection." "She has more than a right," Osseline said, and stepped aside. The Belmont collection occupied an entire lower level, and it was extraordinary. Thousands of bound documents and original manuscripts, symmetrically organized, covering seven centuries of supernatural legal history. Her mother's personal research filled an entire section, 43 archival boxes, organized by date and subject. They found what they were looking for in the 31st box. Her mother, Dr. Lenora Belmont, had spent 3 years of her career documenting a provision of the Third Compact that had been quietly removed from all publicly available copies of the compact text in 1923. The provision, which Mara had labeled the Sovereignty Clause, stated that any human who had been placed under formal blood law protection and who had subsequently survived an attempt on their life by a court-aligned party became, under the original compact text, a legal witness whose testimony was binding on all signatory courts, not merely admissible, binding. Their account of the threat and its origin could not be dismissed, suppressed, or challenged by any court authority, including the court whose protection they held. It was, in effect, an indestructible legal instrument that would force the signatory courts to act on any credible evidence of a compact violation. And Lenora Belmont, who had grown up under Voss Court blood law protection, who had discovered evidence of a major compact violation, and who had survived at least 2 attempts because those men in the alley had not been random at all, was standing in an Edinburgh archive at 4 a.m, holding the original documentation of a clause that made her the most legally significant human in the supernatural world. "They needed me inside the court," she said. Her voice was very quiet, not to harm me. "To get me close enough to find the correspondence, and then to ensure I ran, so that they could have me attacked by affiliates, so that I would survive, and so that when I came forward with the evidence I would be a legally binding witness under the original compact text. They manufactured the whole chain." "Xavian Voss," Xavian said, his voice dark and careful, "needed a human witness with blood law status, who had documented evidence of a compact violation. He could not create that witness from outside. He needed to place one inside a court. My mother found the Sovereignty Clause," Lenora said, "and someone found out that she had found it. And when she died, the protection was arranged for me, and I was brought inside the court. And for 24 years, someone has been very patiently waiting for me to find the right document at the right moment and run." She set the manuscript down and looked at Xavian. He was watching her with that extraordinary focused stillness. That quality of absolute attention that was, she had been realizing for several hours now. Not the trained control of a guard, but something much more personal. He watched her the way someone watches the thing they cannot quite allow themselves to want. "He wants to use me to bring down the Voss Court," she said. The correspondence framed to look like Valdris was his proof of compact violation. Me as the witness who comes forward with it. The entire Voss Court falls, and he returns from exile as the one who exposed the corruption. "Yes," Xavian said, "except." She waited. "Except," he said. "The Sovereignty Clause makes you a binding witness for the actual violation, not the manufactured one. If you come forward with the correct evidence, the correspondence that reveals someone inside the court used Valdris's credentials. The clause protects your testimony and forces a full compact investigation. The investigation would expose the framing, it would expose Drolt's operative. And because Drolt himself orchestrated the manipulation of a blood law protection to create a false witness scenario, he would be in violation of the compact himself, in addition to whatever he was originally exiled for." Lenora stared at him. "He built you a legal weapon," Xavian said, and aimed it at himself. She laughed. It was not a joyful sound, but it was real. The sound of someone who had been holding an enormous amount of tension for a very long time and had just seen the shape of it clearly for the first time. "All right," she said. "All right, but we need to move quickly, because whoever his operative is inside the court will know by now that I have not been returned quietly, and they will start to make contingency moves." "We need to get back to London," he said, "not to the court. To the compact arbitration hall. If you file as a protected witness under the sovereignty clause before the operative can close the loop, the process becomes automatic and they cannot stop it." "How long do we have?" He checked the time. "Sunrise in 40 minutes. I cannot drive in direct sun." She had already catalogued this. She had grown up with vampires. She understood the parameters. "The archive has a secure room," she said. "Osseline will allow it. We shelter here today and drive back tonight." "They will use the day to move against us," he said. "I know." She looked at the manuscript in her hands, then at the archive around her, and then at him. "Then we prepare." What followed was the most surreal day of Lenora Belmont's life, which was saying something given that she had grown up in a vampire court. She and Xavian Voss spent 12 hours in the secured lower level of the Belmont collection, while the archive closed above them, not fleeing but preparing. And the nature of those 12 hours was that they were spent in close proximity over shared purpose, and neither of them was entirely who they had been at the start of them by the time they were over. She organized and copied every relevant document. He used the archive's secure communication system to make contact with the two compact arbiters he trusted, not through the Voss Court channels, through a private line that was his alone, that dated to a formal arrangement he had made with the arbitration board in the 17th century when he had last been called as a witness. She watched him make those calls and understood for the first time the full scale of what he was. Not the guard at the door, not the instrument of someone else's authority. Something 4 centuries old and deeply principled and commanding enough that compact arbiters, who had never personally encountered him, answered his private line within minutes and listened carefully to what he had to say. He ended the second call and found her watching him. "They will have an emergency session convened," he said. "When we arrive with the documentation, the filing will be accepted, and the protection provisions will be immediately activated. You will be placed under compact-level protection rather than court-level, which supersedes any blood law Valdris holds." "That will make Valdris feel betrayed," she said. "Valdris will feel protective," Xavian said. "He does not know about the correspondence or the operative. When I spoke with him yesterday morning, he believed I was simply tracking a frightened young woman who had made a poor decision. When he understands the full situation, he will not feel betrayed. He will feel furious on your behalf. You know him well. I have known him for 200 years, he said. He is arrogant and demanding and occasionally insufferable. He is also genuinely honorable. He built his court on Kailindra's compact principles. Discovering that someone used his identity to undermine them will be the worst thing anyone could do to him personally." She nodded slowly. She moved to the small table where they had been working and sat down and looked at the organized files before her. The day's light was in the building above them, and here below it was only lamplight, warm and contained, and the silence of old manuscripts and older stone. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He turned from the communication panel. The lamplight made him look, if possible, even more unearthly. The white pale skin and the silver white hair, and the absolute carved quality of his features. He was extraordinarily beautiful in the way of things that had been shaped by time into something beyond ordinary categories. "You can ask me anything," he said. "When you said in the car that you could not take me because I looked like somewhere I had chosen to be." She held his gaze. "Did you mean it, or was it a strategic answer designed to make me trust you?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might deflect. Then he crossed the room and sat across from her at the small table, close enough that she could see his eyes properly. Pale silver grey shot through with something older, something that had no human name. "I meant it," he said, "and I was not entirely aware of how much I meant it until I was already saying it. I have spent 6 days following you through this city, and watching you be careful and clever and entirely self-sufficient, and I have been composing the retrieval report in my head the entire time and somewhere in those 6 days the retrieval report became secondary. He paused. You were angry in the alley. Not frightened. Angry, and you put that knife in your pocket as though it were the most practical thing in the world, and you looked at me, and you were not intimidated. I was a little intimidated, she said honestly. The corner of his mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but was the beginning of the shape one makes. You did not show it. I have grown up surrounded by vampires, she said. If I had shown fear every time I was in the presence of something terrifying, I would never have gotten anything done. That is, he said very quietly, one of the bravest sentences I have ever heard. They sat in that lamplight for a moment, and neither of them moved, and neither of them looked away. It was the kind of moment that had weight. The kind that marks itself in the memory with a clarity that does not fade. She said, I have spent my whole life inside the court, and I have never once felt seen there. I was the human ward, the protected liability, the little girl they kept because a blood law said they had to. Even when I was useful in the way a well-organized filing system is useful, not in the way a person is. She looked at the table, then back at him. And you followed me for 6 days, and you saw me well enough to know that taking me would have cost me something. I do not know what to do with that. You do not have to do anything with it, he said. Not tonight. She nodded. They went back to work, but something had settled between them that had not been there before, warm and careful and not at all like a negotiation. They slept in shifts. She slept first on the small cot Osseline brought down, while he kept watch. And when she woke at dusk, he was still at the table with the documents spread before him. Reading, not because he needed to read them again, but because he was too aware of her presence to be still. She watched him for a moment from the cot before he registered that she was awake. He looked, she thought, very alone, the way something old and singular and without equals looks alone. She thought about 400 years of being the best at the thing that defined you, and having no one beside you who operated at the same altitude, and she felt something in her chest that she recognized as tenderness and did not try to talk herself out of it. We should go, she said. He looked up. Yes. They drove through the Scottish Jark and back into England, and the night swallowed the motorway ahead of them, and she sat in the passenger seat and did not try to fill the silence this time either. But it was a different kind of silence now, the kind that has something warm living inside it. An hour from London, she said, after this is done, when the compact has the documents and the arbitration is underway, and I am no longer anyone's liability or instrument. What do you do? He glanced at her. What do you mean? I mean, what do you do with yourself? She said. Do you go back to the court and continue as before? Do you stand at another door and protect another lord and spend another 100 years being the best at a task that asks nothing of you personally? He was quiet for a while. I have been thinking about that question, he said. Since approximately the coffee shop. She turned to look at his profile in the dark. And, I do not know, he said. I know that going back to exactly as before no longer seems like the complete answer it has been for 4 centuries. I am aware that this is largely your fault. My fault, she said. You have a habit of asking questions that require honest answers, he said. It is remarkably inconvenient. She laughed, and it was a real laugh this time, full and genuine, and he heard it, and the line of his jaw changed, became less carved and more human, and he almost smiled. I would like, she said carefully, to access my mother's research properly, not in a crisis, to actually read it, to understand what she spent her life building. She paused. The Belmont collection is extraordinary. Someone should be working with it, using it, not just preserving it. That sounds like a purpose, he said. It sounds like a life, she said. A real one, not a protected one, not a managed one. She looked at him. I would like to have a real one. You will, he said, with a certainty that was not a platitude but a statement of intent. The way he might say that a task would be completed. Absolute. She looked at his hands on the wheel and thought, not for the first time, that he was the most formidable and the most unexpectedly gentle thing she had ever encountered, and she let herself feel that without qualification. They entered London at 11:10. He parked the car 2 streets from the compact arbitration hall, which occupied a building in Holborn that presented itself to the daylight world as a firm of solicitors, and was, beneath the surface, one of the oldest formal supernatural legal bodies still operating in the Northern Hemisphere. Lenora had the documents in her bag, organized and annotated. He had notified the arbiters they were coming. They were not alone on those 2 streets. She saw them first, which was unusual for a situation involving a vampire. 2 figures in the narrow gap between buildings across the road. She caught Xavian's arm without breaking stride, and he followed her sightline and went very still. 2 of them, he said, low. There will be more, she said. If I were the operative and I knew we were heading for the arbitration hall tonight, I would not use 2. He was already scanning the street with the effortless, comprehensive awareness of something that had operated in hostile territory for 4 centuries. 4 more, he said, behind. 1 above, rooftop on the left, and 1 in the hall entrance itself, which means they have already accessed the building. Can the arbiters inside protect themselves? Yes, he said, but not indefinitely, and not if someone gets inside with a mandate from Drolt, she thought quickly. If I get inside with the documents and filed directly with the senior arbiter, the protection activates immediately. It does not need ratification or a waiting period. The sovereignty clause is self-executing upon receipt by a sitting arbiter. If I am in that room with those papers, Drolt loses his mechanism entirely, regardless of what his operative does afterward. Getting you there requires going through all of them, he said. Can you do that? He looked at her. There was something in his expression that was not arrogance, it was knowledge. Yes, he said simply. Then get me there, she said. What happened next was not something she experienced in linear sequence. It was a series of sharp images and sensations, like photographs from a very fast shutter. Xavian moving at a speed that human eyes could not track cleanly, a blur of white and black through the lamplight. The 2 figures across the road, going down fast and clean. Her running, bag pressed to her chest, heels hard on the pavement. A shape dropping from the rooftop that did not reach her because Xavian was there first. Shouting, somewhere behind. The entrance of the hall and the figure there, taller and obviously vampire, who turned to face them with something in his hand. Xavian stepped in front of her. He was not between her and a threat in the way a wall is between 2 spaces. He was between her and the threat the way a person places themselves, deliberately and specifically, and she felt the weight of that deliberate placement in her sternum, like something physical. The vampire at the door was young, by old blood standards. He had the sharp, pale looks and brittle confidence of someone new to covert action and not yet certain of his authority. He looked at Xavian, and the certainty became something noticeably less stable. Xavian Voss, the young vampire said. He was trying for authority. It was not working well. Step aside, Xavian said. 1 register below his baseline, which she was learning was the genuinely dangerous register. I have instruction from, I know who gave you your instructions, Xavian said, and I know exactly what they will cost you when the full combat investigation finds your name in the operative chain. Step aside or compound your situation. Your choice. You have 5 seconds. The young vampire stepped aside. She was through the door and up the stairs, and into the arbitration chamber in less than 30 seconds, Xavian immediately behind her, and the 2 arbiters inside, 1 very old woman and 1 man who looked 50 but was likely 2 centuries, rose from their seats as she entered. Lenora Belmont, the old woman said, we have been expecting you. She placed the documents on the table. Her hands did not shake. I am filing under the sovereignty clause of the original 3rd compact text, she said, as a blood law-protected human witness with documented evidence of a compact violation. I request immediate recognition of witness status and the full protections thereof. The old woman picked up the top document. She read for 60 seconds. She looked at Lenora with an expression that was impossible to read and then became something that was unmistakably respect. Witness status recognized, she said. Protection activated as of this moment. This hall is now a compact sealed proceeding. She looked past Lenora to Xavian. The evidence chain? Complete and annotated, Lenora said, including the original sovereignty clause documentation discovered in the Belmont collection, which is already on record with the archive's custodian as of last night. Then we begin, the old woman said. The arbitration took the rest of the night and most of the following day. It was procedural and exhaustive, and Lenora sat through every hour of it and answered every question with the precision of someone who had spent years working in an environment that demanded accuracy. Xavian remained in the hall. seated to her right, and each time the questioning became aggressive or the opposing representative raised a procedural challenge designed to undermine her witness status, he responded with a calm and thorough legal counter-argument that drew on 4 centuries of watching compact proceedings and understanding their mechanisms at a level no living arbiter could match. She had not expected that. She had expected the sword arm. She had not expected the legal mind behind it, and the combination of those things, the willingness to fight with whatever tool was most effective, the absolute lack of ego about which method that was, rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of who he was. By midday the next day, the arbiters had enough to proceed. The operative was identified. He was not a name she recognized, but Xavian knew him. A mid-level court functionary named Aethric, who had served the Voss estate for 30 years and had been recruited by Dralt's network a decade ago, patient and invisible, waiting for the right moment. The framing of Valdris was exposed. The original correspondence chain was traced back to Dralt's encrypted network through technical analysis that the compact investigation team performed within 4 hours of receiving the evidence. Valdris Voss arrived at the arbitration hall at 2 in the afternoon, with the controlled fury of a 200-year-old vampire lord who had just learned that his identity had been used to prepare a coup against his own court, and that he had been within weeks of its succeeding. He was tall and pale and ancient-looking in the way of old blood lords, broad through the shoulder, white hair longer than Xavian's, with a gravitas that physically altered the atmosphere of a room. He looked at the arbiters, at the documentation, at the assembled evidence, then he looked at Lenora. "You found it," he said. "Yes," she said. "You ran because you did not know if I was involved." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That was sensible," he said. And there was something in his voice that was not comfortable for him. The acknowledgement of a mistake, specifically the mistake of surrounding someone with protection so thorough that it became indistinguishable from captivity. "I owe you an apology for the conditions that made running feel necessary." She looked at him steadily. "You owe me a conversation about what my actual standing in the court has been, and should be going forward. And you owe me access to my mother's research." "Yes," he said, "to all of it." He turned to Xavian, and the long look between them was the look of 2 people who have known each other for 2 centuries, and who are in the middle of a significant recalibration of the relationship. "You gave her your personal word," Valdris said. "I did," Xavian said. "Against your sworn duty to me." "Yes." Valdris was silent for a moment. "Good," he said at last. "If you had not, I would have lost significantly more than a corrupt functionary tonight." He looked between them with the particular perceptiveness of someone very old and very shrewd. Something moved in his expression. He said nothing about it. "The compact investigation will take weeks. Dralt will be formally located and brought in. The internal investigation of the court will require full cooperation from everyone in my house." He looked at Lenora again. "You are, as of today, under compact protection rather than blood law protection. What you do with that freedom is your own decision." She nodded. He left with the arbiters. The hall was quieter with him gone, the pressure of his presence removed. She sat at the table with the documents and felt, for the first time in more years than she could cleanly identify, the particular exhausted lightness of having finished something enormous. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for weeks, for years, if she was honest, had released in increments throughout the night, and she was tired and hungry and absolutely, completely present in a way she had not been before. Xavian was standing by the window. The afternoon light came through glass that filtered sunlight. Compact halls were built with awareness of their vampire occupants, and it fell across him in a muted, warm way that softened the unearthliness of him slightly without removing it. She got up and crossed the room and stood beside him. "It is over," she said. "The immediate danger," he said. "The investigation is just beginning." "You know what I mean." He turned to look at her. They were close. The way 2 people are close when something enormous has been shared between them, and the formality has been dissolved, not by choice, but by circumstance, leaving something unguarded. "I know what you mean," he said. She looked up at him. "What happens now, with you?" "Valdris will require my full involvement in the court investigation," he said. "I am the most senior person in the court and the only one he fully trusts at this moment. That will take, as he said, weeks, and after. He was quiet for a moment. In that way, she had come to understand, meant not uncertainty, but the careful articulation of something he was not accustomed to saying aloud. After, he said, I would like to know what the Belmont collection contains. I would like to understand what your mother built, and I would like... He paused. He looked at her with those silver-grey eyes that held 4 centuries of lived experience, and something that was new enough that it did not have the patina of age on it yet. I would like to be somewhere you are, if that is something you would choose. She held his gaze. Xavian Voss, she said. You are the most formally spoken person I have ever encountered, and you just said something that came extraordinarily close to being a romantic declaration. It was a romantic declaration, he said with great dignity. I was simply being precise about it. She laughed, the real laugh, the one that had softened him in the car on the motorway. And he looked at her and did not try to keep the expression off his face this time. The thing that had been living behind the composure, since the alley, since the coffee shop, since 12 hours in a lamplight archive where they had sat from each other and been entirely honest. She stepped closer and tilted her head up and said, Then let me be precise in return. I would like you somewhere I am. Very much. He lifted one hand and touched her jaw very carefully, the way one touches something rare, and looked at her for a long moment, with all 400 years of him present and all of the walls that those years had built in careful, strategic placement, simply absent. He kissed her. It was quiet and unhurried, thorough in the way of someone for whom patience is not a limitation but a quality, and she reached up and held the lapel of his white coat and felt the extraordinary solidity of him, ancient and certain and entirely present, and did not think about anything else at all. The weeks that followed were full and complicated and entirely unlike anything her life had contained before. The compact investigation moved with the grinding efficiency of a legal machine that had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Aethric was formally charged and removed from the court. Xavian Voss was located within 9 days, in a compound in the Carpathian Mountains that had, it turned out, been his base of operations for the better part of 30 years. His exile had never been the disappearance everyone assumed. He had been patient, rebuilding, and the sovereignty clause mechanism had been his most elegant piece of work, a plan designed to use the compact's own legal architecture to dismantle the court he despised most. He had not accounted for Lenora being as intelligent as her mother. He had not accounted for Xavian Voss deciding, after 437 years, to apply his loyalty to a principle rather than a person. The arbitration process was long and procedurally exhausting, and Lenora attended every session. She was not required to after the initial filing. She chose to, because it was her testimony that had opened the process, and she believed in seeing things through. The arbiters commented on her legal clarity. Valdris, who attended many of the sessions himself, observed her in action, and his expression during those sessions was the expression of a man profoundly reassessing a calculation he had made about someone. He sought her out after one of the later sessions, finding her in the corridor outside the hall with a cup of terrible institutional coffee, and said without preamble, Your mother was the most important legal researcher the Belmont collection ever produced. I knew her work, but I did not know her well. I understand now that I should have known her better, and I should have known you better, and I am sorry for the years in which I confused protection with possession. She looked at him. He was not a comfortable person to be in conversation with, Valdris Voss. He had the weight of 2 centuries and the gravity of a great and self-aware power. But he was also, she thought, exactly what Xavian had said, genuinely honorable. Tell me about the protection arrangement, she said. Who requested it? At the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother came to me when she was pregnant, he said. She had found the sovereignty clause, and she knew that finding it made her vulnerable, because there were old blood interests who would not want that clause restored to active legal standing. She asked to ensure that if anything happened to her, her child would be protected and would eventually have access to everything she had built. She believed if her child was properly placed and properly prepared, that the compact itself could be strengthened, that the old provisions could be restored, and that the political architecture she spent her life documenting could actually be used. Lenora said nothing for a long moment. She planned this, She hoped, Valdris said. There is a difference. She did not know the form it would take. She did not know about Drolt's network. She simply believed that the knowledge she had built was worth protecting, and that the right person with that knowledge could change something real. He looked at her steadily. She was correct. Lenora thought about her mother, dead at 27, a scholar, who had spent her short life building a legal archive in a world that mostly did not know it existed. She thought about the letter delivered on her 18th birthday. When you are ready to know, you will know to come here. She trusted me, Lenora said quietly. She knew you, Valdris said. She finished her terrible coffee and went back into the arbitration hall and sat through another 4 hours of proceedings. And she thought about the shape of legacy and purpose, and what it meant to be the continuation of something someone had loved enough to build carefully in the hope that it would be used. Xavian was waiting for her when the session ended. He was always there at the end of sessions, not because she needed collecting, but because he had understood from very early in the weeks that followed the arbitration hall night that the distinction between choosing to be somewhere and being placed somewhere was the most important distinction in Lenora Belmont's life, and so he always waited and always made it clear that he was there because he chose to be, not because he had been assigned. She walked out to him, and he looked at her face and said, "Valdris spoke to you. How do you know?" You have the expression of someone who has received something they did not expect to grieve and are deciding how to do it with dignity. She stopped walking and looked at him. You read my face very well. I have been learning it for several weeks, he said, with considerable motivation. She smiled. He told me about my mother, what she asked him for, why the protection was arranged. She paused. She was trying to protect the compact the same way she was trying to protect me. Both of us at once. He came to stand beside her, not in front of her, beside her, and that placement was also something she had come to understand, was deliberate, not shielding, accompanying. What will you do with the collection, he asked. Work with it, she said. Properly. There is a lifetime of material in there, maybe more. The sovereignty clause was one provision she documented. There are almost certainly others. Old compact texts, buried protections, legal instruments that were quietly removed from circulation, and might be just as significant. She looked at him. I am going to need help, not protection, help. Different things, he said. Entirely different. He looked at her with something that was vast and steady and not at all newly made. Then I am available, he said, in a capacity I choose rather than one assigned, if that is useful. You have 400 years of compact proceeding attendance and a direct line to the arbitration board, she said. You are extremely useful. Good, he said. Also, she said, more quietly, you are the only person I have met who answers honest questions with honest answers and does not require me to be smaller than I am. She held his gaze. That is significantly more useful. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers closing around hers with the care and absolute certainty, and they stood on the pavement outside the Holborn Arbitration Hall, with the city moving all around them, all noise and light and the endless business of a world, most of which did not know what had just been resolved within those walls, and the warmth between them was quiet and entirely real. The formal conclusion of the Drolt investigation came 6 weeks after the initial filing. He was charged with 17 violations of the Third Compact, including the manipulation of blood law protections, the fabrication of a false legal chain, and the attempted corruption of a bound witness mechanism. The charges were the most significant brought before the Compact Court in over a century, and the proceedings drew representatives from every major supernatural court in Europe. Lenora gave her final testimony in a room full of those representatives, and she did not lower her voice or qualify her account, or allow any of the 3 separate procedural challenges to her standing to rattle her, and when the senior arbiter concluded the testimony session with the phrase "witness testimony accepted" and formally entered into compact record, binding on all signatory courts. She felt something settle in her that she thought was her mother's work completing itself. Afterward, outside in the corridor, where there was slightly less gravity, Xavian looked at her with an expression she had come to know as his version of undisguised pride, which on his face was a particular quality of stillness that was warmer than stillness usually managed to be. Well done, he said. My mother did the actual work, she said. Your mother laid the foundation, he said. You built the house, both matter. She stood up on her toes and kissed him once, briefly, in the corridor outside the room where supernatural legal history had just been made, and several compacted representatives who happened to be passing had very carefully arranged expressions. Valdris, who had been leaving the chamber and who witnessed this, said nothing at all and very deliberately looked at the ceiling for the 3 seconds it took them to separate. Then he said to Xavian, I assume I need to update your employment description. Significantly, Xavian said. I thought as much, Valdris said. He looked at Lenora. The protection arrangement will be formally restructured. You are under compact protection rather than blood law. You have full standing as an independent legal researcher with court access at your discretion. He paused. The Belmont collection is recognized as of today as a formal compact archive. You have been appointed its chief custodian. He said this in the tone of someone ratifying something inevitable. Your mother would have been insufferably smug about all of this. I think she would have been smug about one particular aspect of it, Lenora said, and looked at Xavian, and Valdris followed her eyes and made a sound that in a less dignified person might have been a laugh. The months that followed were the making of a life. A real one. Lenora moved into the archive formally, taking the upper residential rooms of the Holborn building with Osseline's blessing and the compact's official backing, and set to work on her mother's research in a systematic and thorough way that felt, from the very first day, like coming home to a place she had not known she was always meant to be. The material was extraordinary. Her mother had documented not only the sovereignty clause but 12 other provisions of the original compact text that had been removed or altered between the 17th and early 20th centuries, a systematic effort by old blood interests to gradually erode the protections that Xavian Voss had built and that subsequent generations of self-interested powerful vampires had found inconvenient. She spent 3 months working through the archive and emerged with a comprehensive analysis that the Compact Arbitration Board received with the kind of quiet institutional astonishment that signals a fundamental shift in how something has been understood. Xavian was present for most of those 3 months. Not constantly, not in the hovering protective manner she had spent her life surrounded by, but genuinely present in the way of someone who has found that the place they most want to be happens to be the place where someone they love is working. He had formally restructured his relationship with the Voss Court from a position of bound sworn service to one of consultative arrangement, remaining available to Valdris while no longer defined by the role. It was, he told her one evening over the remains of a dinner she had cooked, and he had watched with the particular fond attention of someone who cannot eat, but finds the activity of someone they love intrinsically interesting, the first restructuring of his purpose in 4 centuries. Does it feel strange? She asked. It feels like the difference, he said, between wearing armor because you believe the world is dangerous and wearing it because you have forgotten you are also allowed to take it off. She set down her glass and looked at him across the table. They were in the residential rooms above the archive, both ends of the table covered in manuscript notes and legal analysis. Dinner cleared into a small space in the middle, lamplight exactly like that first night in Edinburgh, warm and contained. 400 years of armor, she said. Yes, I should probably be more daunted by that, she said. The arithmetic of you. The arithmetic of me has never particularly intimidated you, he observed, and there was warmth in his voice now. The kind that had grown in the months since the alley, and the coffee shop, and the archive and the arbitration hall. Not the formal, controlled warmth of someone being courteous, but the deeper kind that does not manage itself. You know, she said, I think I started falling in love with you approximately 45 minutes after you told me you could not take me because I looked like somewhere I had chosen to be, which is probably the fastest and most sensible I have ever been about anything. He looked at her steadily, he said, I started falling in love with you when you put the knife in your pocket. She laughed. The knife. You were just nearly attacked, he said, and your immediate practical response was to secure a weapon for future use. I found it profoundly compelling. That is a very you reason to fall in love with someone, she said. Yes, he agreed. She got up from the table and crossed to where he was sitting, and he turned in his chair to face her, and she sat on the table's edge directly before him, and they were very close, his hands on her waist, hers on his shoulders, familiar and easy and entirely chosen. "What do you want," she asked, "from the next 100 years? Specifically this," he said, "specifically. The archive." "You in the archive," he said. "The distinction matters." She looked at him. The lamplight and the silence and the extraordinary fact of him, this ancient and principled and beautiful person, who had spent 4 centuries being the best at a form of service that had never asked him what he wanted, choosing her, specifically and deliberately, and without any code of law or blood compact requiring it. "I love you," she said, in case the 45 minutes thing was not sufficiently clear. He lifted one hand from her waist and touched her face with the same careful precision as the first time, as though she were still remarkable, as though familiarity had not reduced the quality of his attention by any degree. "I know," he said. "I love you." In case 4 centuries of extremely well-developed understatement has obscured that at any point. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and the lamplight held steady, and the archive breathed quietly around them. Thousands of documents and centuries of careful work, her mother's voice in every page. The winter brought a particular cold to London that drove people indoors and made the streets glitter with frost, and the whole city felt as though it had been pressed closer to its own old bones. The Victorian terraces and Georgian squares, and the ancient river all made sharp and immediate by the cold. Lenora worked through it with an intensity that produced, by January, the first full scholarly publication of the original compact text with complete annotation of all removed or altered provisions, co-authored with Ossoline's formal custodial endorsement, and submitted to the Compact Arbitration Board for official recognition. It was recognized, unanimously, the day the formal recognition came through. Xavian arrived at the archive with a bottle of wine that was older than anyone who would be drinking it, and 2 glasses and a quiet expression that she had learned to read as the external form of something he felt very deeply. "Congratulations," he said. She accepted the glass and looked at it. "My mother spent 7 years on this material and died before she could publish it." "You published it," he said. She would be angry and relieved and very proud, in roughly that order. She thought about that, and decided he was probably correct about the order. They drank the wine in the residential room above the archive and watched the frost on the windows, and were quiet in the way that they were frequently quiet together, which was the best kind of quiet, the kind that is full of everything rather than empty of it. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Asks." "The blood law protection is formally dissolved," she said. "The compact protection is independent and does not require court affiliation. I am no longer attached to the Voss Court by any legal mechanism." "Correct," he said. "You are no longer bound to the Voss Court by sworn service." "Correct," he said. "Which means," she said, "that there is nothing in this entire complex supernatural legal framework that places any requirement on either of us with respect to the other. We are here entirely because we choose to be." He looked at her with the silver-grey eyes and the 4 centuries and all of the armor that he had been, all of the years, taking off in increments since an alley in London where a woman had put a knife in her pocket and looked at him without being impressed. "Yes," he said, "we are here entirely because we choose to be here." "Good," she said. "I wanted that to be stated clearly." "It is," he said, "clearly stated and formally noted." She set down her glass and he set down his, and she moved across the seat to him and put her head against his shoulder, which was solid and cool in the particular way of him, and he put his arm around her, and they sat in the lamplight, with the frost on the windows and the archive beneath them, and the city beyond that. All of it going on in its enormous ordinary way, entirely unaware of the specific and extraordinary thing that had happened in the months since a guard had followed a runaway into the streets of London, and had found that 400 years of unwavering duty had been training him, without his knowledge, for the one moment when wavering would be the most honorable thing he could do. She thought about that. She thought about the night in the archive when he had asked what she would do when it was over. And she had said she wanted a real life, and he had said, "You will," with the absolute conviction of someone making a promise without quite articulating it as one. She thought about all the ways things might have resolved differently. A different guard, a A different night, a different choice in the alley, between fulfilling the retrieval and following her to the coffee shop instead. How thin the margin was between the life she had been living and this one. And she held the thought of that thinness briefly, and then let it go, because the actual fact of the life she was living was considerably more interesting than the hypotheticals of the one she was not. "I am glad it was you," she said. He looked down at her. "What?" "In the alley," she said. "I am glad Valdres sent you specifically." He was quiet for a moment. "I am glad I took the assignment," he said. "I almost did not. I was in the middle of a court audit, and it seemed like a minor task that could be delegated." She considered this. "What made you take it?" "A sense," he said, "that this particular assignment required someone who would not simply retrieve. 4th century intuition, something like that." She tilted her head up and looked at him from very close, and he looked back at her with everything present, no guard, no formality, no armor, just the actual person inside the 4 centuries, which was the most extraordinary thing she had ever had the privilege of knowing. "Stay," she said, simply. "Yes," he said, simply. Outside, the frost continued. The city moved through its winter in the way cities move through winters, constant and indifferent and beautiful in its own sprawling way. Beneath Mayfair, the Voss Court continued its business under Valdres's careful governance. The damage of the Dralt affair repaired with the thoroughness of someone who understood that trust, once formally audited, must be actively rebuilt. In the Holborn archive, the Belmont collection received its first formal researcher visits under its newly appointed custodian, who was developing a reputation in certain academic supernatural circles for being both brilliant and extraordinarily difficult to mislead. Xavian Dralt's final hearing took place in February. The verdict was delivered to a full assembly of compact court representatives from 6 nations. The charges were upheld in their entirety. His exile became permanent and his network was formally dissolved. The testimony of Lenora Belmont was cited 4 times in the verdict documentation, described each time as determinative. She attended the verdict session alone, or nearly alone. Xavian sat in the gallery above. He had asked in the weeks before the verdict whether she wanted him in the hall with her for this final piece, and she had thought about it and said no, that it was important to her to be the one standing in that room as herself, entirely herself, not as a protected witness or a court affiliate or anyone's charge. He had said he understood, and he had been in the gallery anyway because there was a difference they had established early and confirmed often between needing someone and wanting them present. She did not look up at him during the verdict. She did not need to. She felt the particular quality of his attention across the room the way she had come to feel it in general. A specific warmth and weight that was entirely his, and that she had stopped trying to pretend she was not profoundly grateful for. After walking out of the building into the February air, sharp and cold and carrying the particular smell of a city in winter, he fell into step beside her on the pavement. "Is it done?" he said. "It is done," she said. He stopped walking and she stopped with him. And they stood on the pavement and he took her face in both hands and looked at her with the full and unguarded quality of someone who has decided that the distance between what they feel and what they allow themselves to express is no longer a distance they are willing to maintain. "Your mother would be proud," he said. "I want you to know that I believe that completely." She covered his hands with hers. Her eyes were bright and clear. "I know," she said, "and she would have liked you. She would have asked you extremely pointed questions about the third compact and expected precise answers." "I have precise answers," he said. "I know that too," she said. "That is one of the things I like best about you." He kissed her on the pavement in the February cold, with the city going about its business, all around them, and she kissed him back, and it was warm, genuinely and thoroughly warm. The kind of warmth that is not about temperature, but about the specific quality of being exactly where you are supposed to be, exactly who you are, beside someone who has seen all of it and chosen you for it, rather than in spite of it. They walked back to the archive together, her hand in his, the frost beginning to ease as February leaned toward March, and the city's long winter started its slow surrender to something brighter. And the archive received them back, with its particular quiet, all that accumulated knowledge and her mother's handwriting and centuries of careful documentation. The foundation of something her mother had hoped would matter. It had mattered. She would build on it, he would be beside her, and neither of them would be there because a blood law, or a sworn duty, or any ancient code required it. They would be there because they chose to be, which is, in the end, the only reason that matters.